Today, we are going to be doing our first Season 3 tier list. I think it's been long enough at this point to do like kind of an initial impression on the tiers for this version. You know, when it comes to me, I like making early tier lists mainly because I think it's just good to get people thinking about things and seeing how people are valuing certain parts of the game when it comes to a new version. And I also just think it's fun to have something to look back to in a couple of months to be able to compare to and be like, oh, that's how we thought about things previously and how much have they changed, you know, in a couple of months from now. I think having that reference point is really fun. So when it comes to Season 3, this is the biggest change I think we have seen in Strive. We got new system mechanics, we got new special moves. All the characters got pretty significant changes as well. And overall, something that's going to be probably different about this season compared to others is that tier lists are going to be more impacted over time because we're getting new special moves throughout the season. And I'm also assuming more frequent, smaller balance patches. I expect the tier list to kind of develop more over time than it would, you know, in previous versions. For previous versions, the tier list mostly stayed the same throughout the season. Now, before we get into the video, for those of you over on YouTube, I do want to know, how do you feel about the balances version? What characters do you think are strong? What characters do you think are weak? Let me know before you start watching the video. That way we can see, you know, how it links up with mine and the chat's thoughts. I think there is a little bit of a trend in this season. There are two things I think are worth talking about before we start placing our characters. The first one is that they made a lot of system changes in this version of the game, and they also added new system mechanics, right? Between Wild Assault and Deflect Shield, the changes to positive bonus and burst and all of that. And something to keep in mind is usually in fighting games, when you make system changes, it benefits the good characters more than the weak characters because they just have better tools that interact with the game better. And another thing to keep in mind is that if a character didn't change much and they were previously strong, they're probably a bit weaker this version, naturally, because all the characters around them got better. Most characters in this version of the game are stronger than they were previously, largely because of system changes, but they're still stronger. So anyways, I think to start it off, I think there's a top 4 already. If I had to like say what S+ is, I think there's 4 characters, and I think they're largely interchangeable, but I'm going to start it off with not a surprise at all, quite frankly. That's Happy Chaos. So at this point, Happy Chaos being the best character in the game is just a constant fact in our lives, and I think that we just have to come to terms with the fact that this is what Arceus wants. You know, ever since this character's release, he has always been one of, if not just the best character in the game, and I don't think this version is any different. I initially thought that the system changes to the game were going to be like worse for him. I thought they were going to be a downside, and I thought they would nerf him a little bit, but they didn't. I think overall, the way that they changed positive bonus and just the other things in the game, it actually gives him a stronger win condition than he had previously, which is terrifying to think about. And him himself, they didn't really change very much about him. They kind of changed role, I guess, and they nerfed his damage a little bit, but they nerfed everyone's damage. And to be honest, a character like him being in a game with nerf damage is probably overall net positive long term. So yeah, this character is just interesting because it feels like they don't want to tackle any of the problematic things that he does. I will say something about this version in particular, at least. Happy House's biggest advantage pretty much over time has been the fact that he converts better than most characters. And while that is still true, because of the inclusion of Wild Assault and just general character changes, I feel like that bridge has been gapped a little bit more, where a lot of characters, especially other top tiers around Happy Chaos, also have very strong conversions nowadays. So that kind of keeps him more in line, I guess, at least with other characters around him. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything has really changed about this character. And if anything, I think he's stronger this version than he was last version. Next up is going to be the character that I play. It's going to be Ram. I think Ram is very stupid this version of the game, like more stupid than she has been in the past. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like they attempted to make her worse. I'm not entirely sure, but they definitely messed up if they did, because I think she is almost just objectively better than she was last version. You know, she got some impactful nerfs, like her movement speed got nerfed, I guess, and it kind of comes up against some characters, but not really. And they also nerfed her Rekka not having big counter hit effect anymore, which is a notable nerf. But the things that they gave her, specifically Wild Assault and the changes to positive bonus and all the things that come with those changes, I think are insane for her. The way that this character converts now into such a consistent win condition is honestly better than it has ever been. Like, she has a much more defined win condition that she's had before. It kind of makes her very flowcharty. Like, you can just play a flowchart with this character and play her almost like a set play character. That, along with the buff to 214K, I think 214K being a frame trap tool is way better than plus on block 214K we had previously. And of course, the new special move, Ondo, aka Rock, I think is insanely strong. It is such a good special move. It's good for pressure, it's good for neutral. Some characters greatly struggle to punish her just doing 5H into rock, for example. And just having it in corner pressure, you can get so many stolen turns in your pressure because of rock and how terrified people are of mashing against Ram, that I just think they kind of went overboard with this character. And I don't know if that was their intention, but her mid to long range is so much more dominant than it was before because she actually converts those hits. Before, she did not really convert very well from mid-range hits outside of having like 50 meter or specific counter hits. But now everything converts into like unburstable wall break, into positive bonus loop, into you get mixed up once and then you die. Yeah, I think the chat is right on who we talk about next. I think Nago is also amongst these top 4 characters. Nago is another funny character because I don't know if the intention was to buff or nerf him this version, but they definitely buffed him. He's definitely stronger. So the thing about Nago is he got some pretty important nerfs, honestly. Like nerfing 5k was a really big deal. When they removed the lower, or sorry, added the lower hurt box to his 5k, it actually makes him a lot weaker in certain situations where he could kind of like force people to deal with like 5k or 6p or backdash. 5k not being representable in that RPS the same way is a notable nerf for him. But this version, they gave him one of the stupidest buffs that I've ever seen, which is making Beyblade a low. Beyblade being a low is such a weird change because it makes playing neutral with this character infinitely harder. Like, it cannot be stressed how much harder it is to fight against Nago because you cannot walk back in neutral safely because Beyblade is a low. That alone makes his neutral so much more potent than it used to be, especially for certain types of characters that would maybe do well against him previously. And of course, he also has the overhead on the second hit of his DP now. I feel like that change is not even that big of a buff, but I do think it's really bad game design. I don't know why they did that. Him just having these like abusable high lows that like usually you have to all in on, right? Like normally Nago players just do it at the end of the round and they try to cheese you, right? It's like, I'm gonna do this. If it works, I win the round. If it loses, I blood rage and I lose. I don't like that design. I think that design doesn't make any sense. It makes him more of a Mario Party character, but it also does let him cheese out way more wins, especially in tournament. And I think that is very valuable. White Wall Assault, I don't know how good White Wall Assault is yet. I do think it's pretty annoying. I think ultimately it's not that strong. The changes to 6H as well, I think are kind of a nerf because it makes like 6H OTG into Fukio. Like you can't do that anymore. It changes his game flow a little bit, but not significantly, I think. And on top of that, it also gives him a really good pressure tool and it does a lot of chip damage because it's a guard crush move now. On to the last character for the, what I think is the top 4 right now, is going to be Chipp. So running with the trend, I don't know if they're objective was to make Chipp a better character, but he is definitely better this patch, unfortunately. He did get some nerfs, namely they made Rekka counter hit not a thing anymore, so you don't have to worry as much about getting frame tracked by Rekka. But everything else they did to this character is insane. Wild Assault on this character, Wild Assault on both Ram and Chipp, it probably benefits those two more than any other character. Anytime you give a good system mechanic to a game, the better characters are going to use it better because they have better moves, they have better tool sets that complement system mechanics. So with Chipp, he has amazing whiff punishing, but it didn't really lead to that much reward usually. Now at the start of the game, you get whiff punished by Chipp, you're wall broken and the game might as well be over because he's going to do a positive loop into a high-low mix-up. You're not even going to get your burst back and the game is over. The problem with these 4 characters is I feel like they benefit from the system changes too much and they snowball way too hard. I think that they abuse the game and I don't know if they caught that. I don't think they are aware that these characters were going to do to the game what they do. Also, you know, they keep lowering damage, right? They lower damage this version of the game and they actually did a good job this time. Damage is notably lower and that just benefits a character like Chipp, who his downside is supposed to be low health. Anyways, that is my top 4. Again, I think these characters are cut above the rest. And I think they are very, very strong. And I think they're a little bit unhealthy being this good. That's my current impression. So to start this tier off, I think about the first 2 or 3 characters we're going to talk about are about the same strength. But the first one I'm going to talk about is Soul Bad Guy. You know, Soul is really funny because there was a time, a very long period of time, in fact, that as, you know, players in NA ranked this character pretty lowly for a while. And I just got to say that Soul players did a really, really good job at downplaying. You actually had me for a while, but we started coming around to it. We started realizing the truth, and going into this version, I still think he's a very strong character. In fact, I think he's like technically slightly better this version because they buffed his 2K. His 2K is 5 frames now. I don't know why, I don't even understand why that was a change, but he does have a 5-frame 2K now. Well, Assault is pretty good for him, and in general, I think the changes are just fine for him. You know, he's got a good kit, so he just kind of blends with the game fine. However, I will say, I think an advantage that some characters had in the previous version of the game, a lot of characters like Sol, Leo, Nago, those characters had an advantage where they were pretty healthy. You know, they had a good amount of health, they had good defensive options, and they would actually win the resource war long term. You know, Sol would always be able to get his burst back because, you know, he had good defensive options, good amount of health. He'd always build a lot of meter just because of the way that he played the game. Those types of advantages are actually not quite advantageous anymore because of the changes to positive bonus. The amount of resources being thrown around at this point are just insane. Sol was a character that kind of benefited from how it worked previously, and I don't think he benefits from it anymore. So that's kind of why I don't think he's like S+ tier, even though I think he is very, very strong. He just doesn't abuse the game like the others above him do. But he's still really good. He has a great matchup spread. And overall, I think he just has a type of kit that no matter how the game changes, he's always going to be good. Next up after Sol is going to be Giovanna. Giovanna, this version is extremely good. Okay, she was very good last version, although not a lot of people like were fully aware of it, I think. Because we don't have that many top-level Giovanna players, I would say. The way the game works now is good for her, and her new special move is very beneficial because they've been doing this thing where they are slowly giving Giovanna better combos and better conversions. And that has always been a thing that she wasn't great at, I would say. This version of the game, because of her new special move, a lot of her conversions, along with the changes they made previous version, a lot of her conversions are just insane now. I think Giovanna is really good. Again, she has a very good matchup spread. And before, I would say she wasn't like, she was a pretty straightforward, honest type of character, but I think at this point, they've made her pretty unhonest. The thing about Giovanna that makes her so good, she is a character with an unreactable dash, meaning you have to play preemptively against her. However, she is also one of, if not the best character in the entire game at with punishing. So she just has this loop of like, I have to press preemptively. Oh, I got punished for it. All right, I'm not going to press preemptively. And then she just dashes at you, and then she's in your face, and you're getting strike thrown to death. So that is honestly just a pretty unfair way to play neutral. Like, it's actually not fair at all. You know, they gave her access to Guard Crush with the enhanced Spiral Arrow this version, which just makes her offense a little bit stronger than it was before. So yeah, I think she's really good. And then lastly, this might be a surprise to some people. For this trio of characters, I'm going to put Asuka. I think Asuka is still hard to rank. Okay, this is kind of like we're still kind of at a prediction phase because this character recently has picked up in popularity a lot. Largely because of the exodus of Zato players that do not want to play Zato anymore. But in general, you know, when a new season starts, it gives people this idea that like, okay, you know, I have some time to go learn a new character. And Asuka is a super interesting and deep character, so a lot of people want to play him. So yeah, we're still at a point where people are investigating the character. We're still learning the matchup. The ceiling for this character feels like the highest in the entire game, to be honest. And there are a lot of different ways to play the character. There's a lot of different options to consider. He has really good neutral, especially for his archetype between cubes, between his pretty good normals. His offense is very overbearing because he can honestly just have super extended turns, right? You can go through sequences where Asuka is on his own offense for 20 plus seconds sometimes, right? I think a lot of people are aware of like the Exodia playstyle win condition that some Asuka players are going for, which is obviously very strong, but he has more than just that, right? He has a lot of different ways to win the game. And that's kind of what I'm valuing about him, is that I feel like there's no way that at least some of those win conditions don't always stay strong. And he always has ways to win matchups, you know? So I could see him going down a little bit, but I can also frankly see him going up a little bit. I'm kind of going with like the in-between here. And this is just kind of where I think he is right now. Funnily enough, he actually didn't change very much this version, right? They made his DP a hard knockdown, which is a weird change. And they gave him Blue Wild Assault, which he uses it pretty well. He uses it better than most characters use Blue Wild Assault. He's probably the one character in the game that not changing was actually overall pretty good for him, I would say. Okay, so like I said, I think the next 4 characters are pretty interchangeable, and I don't think the order matters that much. But I think there's a character that I think we should just talk about them now, because I feel like this character is going to be on the map very soon, and people are going to realize it. I think Ino is really, really stupid this version. I feel like Ino got by far the best new special move out of the 6 characters that got the special move this version. Honestly, it feels like it's like a joke move. I have no idea why she has a 26 frame advancing guard crush combo starting special move that gives her a mix-up. Insane special move that fixes basically every problem I think this character has had, outside of a couple of specific matchups, of course, right? Ino obviously is a very polarizing type of character. she's going to have some matchups that even with a giga broken special move, she's still going to have issues in those matchups. This special move helps her in neutral. It gives her another way for her to RPS her way in neutral. This character's entire game plan in neutral is RPSing with you. It gives her another tool in pressure that makes her pressure way better than it used to be. She used to have a lot of issues with being very linear in her offense, and I think that this new special move really helps her with that problem. It lets a lot of her average conversions just murder you, along with Wild Assault. Wild Assault is a really big buff for this character. Used to not really convert that well, but now she can convert a lot of hits just into a wall break, and that is super duper value for this type of character, I think. She always had good mix-ups, but she always had like kind of not great risk reward on them because she did have to interact with you on her offense, right? But I think the changes to her offense really help skew that back into her favor. Now again, she could end up like lower than the next couple of characters we're going to talk about. I just feel like there's a lot of chances that this character is super duper strong. Next up is Leo Whitefang. So Leo has always been super duper good in this game. This is probably the version he's the weakest, relatively speaking, but he's still very good, obviously. I think the big nerf to Leo this version is literally that they finally took out H Flash Kick being a reversal. H Flash Kick not being a reversal, it's like the thing that we always needed. You know, that was always the thing that put him over the top and just made him very unreasonable, I think. But now that he doesn't have that, he's a good character. He's a strong character, but he's not over the top anymore, I feel like. Red Wild Assault is pretty good for him, but I think it's a little bit better for some other characters more than him. And I think other characters getting better, right? Like Happy Chaos, Ram, Nago, Chipp. Those characters I think all beat him this version of the game, and that's another reason why I'm putting him a little bit lower compared to like Season 2 tier list. I don't want to be like a Leo down player. I'm not downplaying him. I just think he is finally in a spot where he's not just stupid. But he is very, very good. He can still win every matchup, I think. Next is going to be Kyle. Kai is very good this version, actually. I've never been a full-on Kai believer, and still a part of me wants to kind of doubt it this version, but I can't really doubt it anymore. He's just very good. His Far Slash is one of the best buttons in the game now because of making it faster. Not only is it faster startup, but they didn't change anything else about it, so it's very hard to whiff punish as well. And Wild Assault is very, very good for him. If you have good pokes like Kai does, then Wild Assault naturally just benefits you a lot. And it kind of fixes his two biggest problems that he's had in the past, where he has generally favorable button interactions in neutral against most of the cast now, and his average conversion is quite good at this point. I know obviously they nerfed Stun Dipper as well, which is, you know, a little bit of a nerf, but I don't think it matters that much. So I think he's looking really good this version, and this is probably the best version of Kai we've ever seen. And the last character for this tier, and probably the most improved character this version of the game, is going to be Sin. I need to talk about this character because basically Sin didn't exist last version, right? Like no one played him. He wasn't a very good character. This version, he got the hookup. He got some of the best buffs you could have ever asked for. I will say, I think there's a potential chance he's not S tier and he's A tier. There's also a chance that maybe he's slightly higher in S tier as well, of course. But I think it's a fair chance that he's S tier. So I'm just going to put him up there for now. He has really good neutral in many matchups. Good buttons, right? His Far Slash is good now. His 2S is good. And, you know, some parts of his kit have always been good, but there was nothing to complement them. The changes he got made him more complete. So the things that were good but it didn't matter, they actually matter that they're good now, right? Like Elk Hunt, I mean, they buffed it this version especially, and because of that, Elk Hunt is very, very good now because of how good his conversions are. He's always had good conversions. Those conversions actually matter now because of his changes. So it's a combination of like he got really good buffs, and his buffs make the other things that were already good about him stand out more compared to before. I think in general, the big buffs that are kind of carrying him this version are Elk Hunt is super good. Being able to Kara cancel into super without draining calories is very valuable, I think. I think that's really good for him. And of course, just his Far Slash being faster is a really big deal. The only reason I think he might go lower is because I feel like everyone sucks against this character right now because frankly, we never had to lap him before. He wasn't very good. And I think there's room for him to go down a little bit once people get better at the matchup, but we'll have to see. So that is going to do it for S tier. Those are the last characters I think belong in S tier this version of the game. And now we're going to move on to A tier. And A tier is going to be one of the most nerfed characters, it's gonna be Mei. Mei last version was a top 3 character, arguably best character in the game. And this version, she has dropped about 10 characters on the tier list, which is pretty impressive. I still think she's pretty good, but she is kind of a hard character to rank because I feel like she's actually not that popular and not a lot of people are playing her, right? She is fine, right? She has good normals. Red Ball Assault is actually pretty good for her, but it's not anything compared to what she used to do, especially relative to the rest of the cast, you know? Mei kind of gets hit on 2 fronts where on one hand, they made her conversions a little bit worse because she either has to spend resources to do them or she just can't do them anymore. Because of the changes to like 6H and 2H, for example. Other characters in the game are converting better than they used to, so she doesn't stand out as much in that regard anymore either. But she still has good normals, she still has good pressure. Dolphin is still an obnoxious move, though it notably is considerably worse because it has less pushback this version. Dolphin RPS is a lot less RPS than it used to be. And she's at the point now where like a lot of the reason she was strong before is because she just won risk reward too hard, and along with how good her buttons were, it just wasn't fair for a lot of characters. Statistically, they would just, you know, no matter how many situations you won against Mei, as long as she won some of them, she was probably getting more reward than you were. So I think she's fine. I think she has a lot of like even to just doable matchups, but she's just not standing out anymore, and she's just a fine character. Next character is Bridget. So Bridget was a character that was actually pretty strong last version. She was like definitely top 10 last version. And this version is actually the character that I think is like the defining example of she didn't change and that's why she got worse. I think she barely changed at all this version. I don't think she like benefits or is hurt by system mechanics that much. I don't think her own changes matter that much. She could maybe still technically be higher than this, but I really don't think she is. She doesn't stand out as much anymore in my mind. She still has good things, don't get me wrong. She is still a good character. Like I said, she isn't nerfed or anything. You know, she has good normals. She has good set play still. Her conversions are still pretty good. But other characters are just doing way more unfair things this version of the game, and I think it makes her not bad, but she doesn't stand out anymore. Next up in A tier, I think is probably Jacko. Jacko is kind of weird this version because I think she got better in some regards and got worse in some regards. At the end of the day, though, I think the main thing about this character is that she's just very polarizing, right? And I don't think that changed this version. She has some matchups that are pretty bad for her, you know, like Ram, Happy Chaos. Some matchups like that are pretty bad for her, I think. Kai as well. But at the same time, she has really potent offense, and I think the changes to like Wild Assault being able to give you a hard knockdown on wall break is super valuable for a character like Jacko specifically, because it allows her to maintain her snowball a little bit better. Because this character always had a problem where she wanted to use meter for her offense, and then she would wall break you, and then her offense would end because she wouldn't have meter to break the wall with. So it's kind of hard to say, but I think she's overall still a good character that just has some bad matchups, and she can still make up for it because of her offense. All right, this next one, I think is a little bit of a hot take, and I don't know if people are ready for this yet, but I do genuinely believe that this is now the time where Millia is a good character. I think it's true. I think Millia is pretty good this version of the game. Now, obviously, she didn't get like super buff this version. I think a lot of it is just seeing how Millia players have developed over the years, along with the fact that she got pretty decent changes this version. Similar to Jacko, I think Wild Assault is useful for her to be able to maintain offense, especially for wall breaks. I think it's really good for her. I think the changes to positive bonus are also really good for her. I think she really likes the changes to the system mechanics overall. And she got some pretty nice changes herself. So I don't think she's like broken or anything, obviously. You know, I don't have her in S tier or anything. But I think she is a very solid character, and I think she's good now, you know? I don't think she needs anything crazy. I think they have finally got her in a situation where a big problem I've always had with her is I didn't think that she blended with the game very well. I always felt like she was like at odds with system mechanics and whatnot. At this point, I don't think she's like that anymore. I think she actually likes how her game flow is played. Next up in A tier is going to be Axel. Axel's always been like honestly pretty good and like always had a pretty interesting spot in the meta, and he actually got some pretty good changes this version. I think his 2P is better. I think the changes to Renton are actually really good. The fact that it has more pushback like it does is very nice. I think Wild Assault is actually good for him. It really gives him access to more conversions, and I think he really likes having positive bonus. A character like this that plays a little bit slower who can really just, you know, kind of milk out the positive bonus timer and get your burst back and that type of thing. And just having more bursts in a match in general, I think is actually really good for Axel. So I think he gels with the changes, and I think he's good against some important characters like Nago and Asuka. He's just the type of character that always has like a place in the meta, you know what I mean? And I think he got a little bit better this version as well. So things are looking pretty good for Axel. I personally think that now we're moving on to the characters that are in B tier, and I'm gonna first start off with Baiken. Now this one's still a little controversial, but I feel like I just what I've seen from Baiken and what I've seen Baiken players talking about and my own investigations on the character, I don't think she's that great anymore. They nerfed Yozansen pretty considerably, where a lot of combos are either way harder, way more specific, or just don't work anymore. They nerfed parry damage, so getting parried is not just going to end the round anymore. System mechanics are not that great for her. She doesn't really care about Wild Assault that much. Other characters converting more on average is pretty bad for her as well. She doesn't use positive bonus that well, and I think other characters getting easier access to positive bonus is not great for her. So overall, I just feel like it's a combination of like she got a bit worse, everyone around her got a bit better, system changes aren't that good, and like she is maybe A tier still, like on the low end. Next up on the list is going to be Goldlewis for me. Goldlewis is another character that I think is just not doing super hot this version of the game. He, again, like I don't think the system changes really do anything for him. A lot of characters around him got a lot better. And I think in particular, the nerf to his Far Slash is actually pretty severe. I don't know why they hit his Far Slash. Obviously, he can still rob you. They didn't really change that about him. But I just think these days, especially with how much more accessible like burst is, we get so much more burst meter these days, and just how much better conversions are. Characters can actually hit Goldlewis and like get meaningful situations from it for themselves. He's not bad or anything, I guess, but like, is he winning a lot of matchups? He just doesn't feel like a character that's like winning matchups or anything. He just seems like he robs you, and that's all he has going for himself. Pretty much similar to Baiken, I think. Okay, I think next for me is probably the highest I have ever ranked this character, if I think about it. And it's actually gonna be Faust. I think Faust is like, I mean, obviously he's not great because I'm putting him in B tier, but I do think this is the best that he's been. I think the system changes are actually like fine for him. You know, I think he like slightly benefits from them. I think the new move he got is actually pretty beneficial for him. I think it's like mostly just because of the recovery that it has. The fact that he can kind of be more safe in some situations is pretty nice for him. Overall, it's not the best that it could have been for him. I think if he had Red Wild Assault, he would have been way better this version. I don't think he uses Blue Wild Assault that well. And he ultimately has most of the same issues that he had before. You know, relative to some other characters in this area, I think he gels with the changes a little bit more than some other characters do. Next up is Zato. Zato is by far the most nerfed character. I didn't even mean to make a Latif joke there, but he's by far the most nerfed character. He's not great this version. The changes they made to him are just bad for him. Eddie stays dead longer. They nerfed his P buttons. They nerfed his flight time. Those are just not good things for him. The system changes are really bad for him. You can actually just burst and deny Eddie for like 8 seconds now, and that is such a disadvantage for this character to have, dude. If someone has positive bonus, it's basically impossible for this character to beat you at that point. Like, yeah, can he rob you? Sure, it's still Zato. He could back throw you and maybe make something happen. But it's honestly harder to rob you this version because of the changes they made. It's way easy to stop yourself from being robbed because of the changes that were made. And he's just way less stable of a character because of the changes that they made. That all said, I do have to say congratulations to Zato players. He is finally on the tier list where you thought he was. So you guys got what you asked for. Congratulations, I'm happy for you. Can I get a round of applause for Zato players? Next on the list is going to be Johnny for me, I guess. Johnny is still new, obviously. I still have to kind of see how things are developed, but my current impression of this character is that while he does have some good things, his buttons are like pretty good. I think his Oki is pretty good because he has high-low Oki, obviously. And I think his conversions could be pretty decent because he actually has a really big Wild Assault for some reason. He also has some really bad things, namely the fact that he cannot cancel his dash into anything. His dash, he is locked into for 18 frames. He can't block, he can't jump, he can't press a button or anything. And it honestly just makes him very dysfunctional in a lot of matchups. Any matchup where you need to be able to dash block, any matchup where you need to be able to represent like fast burst movement, he just isn't good in those matchups at all. Questionable character design because if you buff his dash, you definitely need to nerf other things about him. At least that's my guess at this point. But yeah, the current version of him, I don't expect to be super great. he is cool, and I like, you know, how he looks. His combos are cool and all of that, but they just designed him in such a poor way. And then last for B tier is Anji. Anji last version was actually like a fine character. He was like pretty decent, but for whatever reason this version he just kind of got smoked, I would say, because they nerfed the counter hit on Fujin and all of its follow-ups, which drastically nerfs his offense and makes his neutral a fair bit worse, I would say. Unfortunately for Anji, his new special move, while I do think it is good, I don't think it like saves him. I don't think it like makes him like a menace of a character or anything. I think red wall assault is good for him, but it's also good for a lot of characters and a lot of characters that are better than him. So at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. Moving on to bottom tier and C tier, these are the last three characters that I just don't really think are very good. And I know one of them is going to be a hot take, so let's talk about them first. It is Testament. Testament, honestly, you know how we were talking about Soul? How Soul was like one of the most like gaslit characters in the entire community. Oh, he's not actually that good. He has so many bad matchups. He has so many downsides, right? And then he ended up being really good. That's just Testament in reverse. This character has been for a very long time talked up like, oh yeah, they're high tier. They're a good character. They're well-rounded. They have good matchups. I feel like all that has happened is that we have realized how they are just not good. They just aren't. They have too many problems. They have too many matchups that are really bad for them. Their buttons are good, but not good enough to make up for all the downsides they have. Their defense is not very good. Their offense is way too fair, way too straightforward. They don't convert that well in neutral, even with Red Wall Assault, right? I thought Red Wall Assault was going to be a really big deal for them, and it is good. It is nice, but just because of their normal combo structure, it doesn't end up being as good for them as it does a lot of other characters in the game. I am just not high on this character at this point. They might be B tier, you know? I know there's an argument that there just isn't like a super top level Testament player really showing off what they can do. Moving on, next is Potemkin. Potemkin I thought was going to get a lot better this version, actually, but what it turns out is a lot of his changes either don't matter or have negative impacts that we were not expecting. So for example, I thought his 5p hitting crouchers was going to be like a big deal. I thought that was going to be really nice for him, but it only hits crouchers that are like right next to him, which doesn't really help that much at the end of the day. Mega Fist I thought was going to be better because it was actually going to give him reward on hit instead of being minus on hit. While that is nice, it's not that good in practice, and it also hurts a lot of his combos because he doesn't have a hard knockdown at the end of his combos anymore. For whatever reason, they gave him the worst white wild assault. I don't know if you guys have seen the hitboxes for wild assaults. He has the worst one. Out of all four of the characters with white wild assaults, he has by far the worst one. I don't know why it's so bad. Honestly, out of all the characters, he's the one that it would make sense to give him the best out of the four, and he got the worst one for some reason. I think he is a overall weaker character than he was last version. And then the last character in the game, who actually did get better this version, but I still just think they suck, is Bedman. I just think that this character has too many problems for them to be a good character. There's possibility that they're like better than the other two in this tier. They're not like definitively the worst character in the game. Their defense is really bad. They're very big. They're very slow. So I don't know. Maybe they're better than this, but I don't think it's really worth talking about. So that's all I got. So yeah, that is what my initial impressions of Season 3's tier list is looking like. Of course, again, I do want to know what you guys think. What do you think of the tier list? How would you change some things? Where would you put some characters? Let me know down in the comments below. If you did enjoy the video, please consider dropping a like and subbing to the channel. It'd really help me out, and I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.